Every day you put your life on the line to protect and serve. Who's protecting you? United Badges Insurance Services operates as a dedicated resource for the first responder public safety community. Serving thousands of first responders, United Badges offers a wide range of products including commercial insurance, group accident and health insurance, and personal insurance such as auto, home, renters, rental properties, vacation properties, boat, motorcycle, RVs, flood, and umbrella. United Badges serves active and retired public safety personnel, public safety agencies, public safety associations, public safety support businesses, and public safety families and friends. Experience the United Badges difference. Call 800-566-5990 or visit unitedbadges.com to request your free insurance quote today. United Badges Insurance Services is a proud strategic partner of the Florida Deputy Sheriff's Association. Applicants are individually underwritten by each respective insurance carrier and subject to insurance policy terms and conditions. Not available in all states. Promotional material for descriptive purposes only. Welcome to The Tactical Pause, the official podcast of the Florida Deputy Sheriff's Association. I'm John Creamer, Deputy Executive Director of FDSA. Each episode, I sit down with law enforcement thought leaders to tackle critical issues shaping the future of public safety. Together, we'll explore key topics that empower law enforcement professionals to navigate challenges, lead with confidence, and advance their careers. Take a pause, gain valuable insights, and lead your career with purpose. Thanks for listening. Joining me today is a friend and mentor, Matt Dunagan, who is the Executive Director of the Florida Sheriff's Association. So, Matt, thank you for taking time out of your busy day to come in and spend a little bit of time with us.
So glad to be here.
So, listeners, if you don't know, FSA has a very large podcast and a following. So it's unusual for me to be on this end of Matt.
I'm on the other end of it, which is interesting.
Yeah, and you will confess. No,
yes.
I'm kidding. So Matt, tell us about you. Like for me personally, before we came on the air, I know a little bit about your story at FSA, but I don't know much more about your career and what led you from college to the Florida Sheriff's Association and then to the Executive Director's Office.
Well, happy to tell you that story because, you wake up in the morning and you think to yourself, well, how did I get here? And sometimes it's an interesting path, and it's certainly one for me because I grew up in Chicago, the west suburbs of Chicago, to be precise, a town called Elmhurst, Illinois. But I always loved warm weather. My grandparents lived in Florida, and I thought to myself, when I get ready to go to college, I'm going to go far away from here, somewhere warm, and was always a big fan of Florida State University and the football team, and was able to apply and get in. And so while a lot of my friends were going to Midwest schools or Big Ten universities, I was packing my bags in the summer of 1999 and headed to Tallahassee to go to Florida State University, which I loved, and did 4 years at Florida State. And my focus was on political science and then a minor in economics. And I was always interested in getting into politics.
Okay.
And really the way it really got my career started is just kind of happenstance. My mom worked in communications in the Archdiocese of Chicago. That's how small world is, and how sometimes a chance meeting can kind of change your life. One of the women that worked at the Archdiocese, her son was an attorney working in the governor's office of Florida. And she was very proud of her son. They're sitting there in downtown Chicago at the Archdiocese. And my mom said, well, my son is going to Florida State. He's a junior. If you ever need any help, you should look him up. And so cards were exchanged, and I reached out to this person, and they actually had something going on. In the Governor Bush's office, there was an Office of Drug Control. And it kind of set the policy for the state dealing with all issues related to drugs, kind of guided the department's prevention efforts, treatment, as well as law enforcement. And they were putting on this really big drug summit. And then I was asked to kind of just work that. And that was my first job working in government, was getting to work with the director at that time, which was retired Army Colonel Jim McDonough. And couldn't have had a better mentor early on in my career, kind of showing me the ropes of how to do things the right way and how to, live your life with integrity. And so from there, I was able to stay on there for the rest of my college career of getting to work with the Office of Drug Control team and their office. I know you're probably familiar with the Capitol at the time, because Governor Jeb Bush had made that issue such a focal point of his years as governor. Their offices were right there on plaza level. And so anytime you needed to use the restroom or go to a meeting or anything, you were connected to the governor's office. So think about it, a 20-year-old kid from Chicago getting to almost every other day run into the governor of Florida was
amazing.
Pretty cool. And then, but at the end there, I had, again, great advice from Colonel McDonough, where he said, you should get some more real world experience. You've got plenty of opportunities working in warehouses and things like that. You should figure out something else to do. So I went back to Chicago. I worked for a couple of years. And one of the most rewarding things I did was work at a substance abuse treatment center. And it was an organization called TASK, Treatment Alternatives for Safe Communities. And I got hired for about an 18-month opportunity where we were taking these new federal grant dollars, because at the time, it's all connected. You had Governor Bush down in Florida, but his brother was president. And one of the big things that the presidency of George Bush was doing was obviously the whole idea of vouchers.
Right.
And so they were kind of trying to do the same thing with substance abuse treatment, of not having all these dollars float everywhere, but have it go with the individual. And so the program I worked at was sitting at the 26th in California courthouse, getting to interview and screen individuals who had drug addiction problems and working with judges at the Cook County Courthouse to figure out ways of getting them to those substance abuse treatment providers or recovery support services, whatever they needed. But I really enjoyed that work. It was really rewarding work. But from there, again, different things happened. And next thing you know, that program was kind of coming to an end. And I was at a point in my young career where I wasn't really sure what to do. And when you get to those points, you really reach out to your friends and mentors. And I went out and contacted Colonel McDonough. And by that point, he was now the secretary at the Florida Department of Corrections. And he became the secretary of the Florida Department of Corrections because the previous secretary had gone to federal prison on corruption charges. And he had his hands full there at the department, but asked if I would be interested in coming on board to work with him. And that was just an unbelievable opportunity. So I got to work with him in the secretary's office and have another mentor there in community corrections, Colonel Bruce Grant, who ran all of probation and community services for the department. So having both Colonel McDonough and Colonel Grant as my mentors was just a huge thing for me, because they helped kind of guide my maturity in all the things that I was doing. And from there, when their times ended at Department of Corrections, another kind of break for me was through Colonel Grant getting an opportunity to meet a candidate who was running for Attorney General. We're headed into now, I think at that point, the 2010 elections. And there was about 2-3 people running in the Republican primary for Attorney General. And one of them was Pam Bondi. And I got to visit with her and brief her on a wide variety of public safety issues. And that meeting went so well, talking about prescription drug diversion and a whole host of other issues. Once she got through the primary and won and became the Attorney General, I got hired as a chief policy analyst in her office, dealing with the issue of pill mills, prescription drug diversion, and other public safety issues.
Okay.
Had a fantastic time working for her during her first term. And then this opportunity at this Florida Sheriff's Association popped up, and they were hiring for the Deputy Executive Director for Operations, which handled a lot of the communication work, task forces, training, but more importantly, the legislative affairs. And at that point, I interviewed for it, went well, and I came on board in the fall of 2014. And the next decade or so, I was the Deputy Executive Director for Operations.
Right. Okay. Let me back up and tell you, as an end user, like some of the things you did. So when you were at Florida State, 1999, you said, right? So that's when Bowden won his second national championship. And it had to be amazing, because I graduated there in 92 and he hadn't won one yet. So you were there for a second one. That had to be amazing.
It was. It was a great way to start your college career, where you start to think every year all you do is win a national championship. Because my sophomore year, they played again in the national championship game, but lost. And then obviously we had a little bit of some struggles there. But the whole atmosphere, the campus, I fell in love with it from almost day one. It's not just a great place to walk around and meet people, but also the school that I was so interested in was the political science. And then obviously going back later on to do my master's work in public administration, the Askew School, named after Governor Reuben Askew. I got a chance to be in one of his classes before he passed away. And you learn so much from a former governor of Florida who in the 1970s had so much to deal with. So I couldn't have asked for a better situation from a college atmosphere of professors, but also from just seeing it from the campus just off to the distance, the state capitol, at such a time when the president of the United States' brother was governor of Florida, and he was working on all of these various public safety issues. And the issues at that time was a lot of issues dealing with, and we're still always going to be dealing with it, of drug abuse. So it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. And so Same thing. So while you were doing that, I was with the Tallahassee Police Department, and I was at the time when Governor Bush was in office. I was assigned to our TAC team, our SWAT team, and after 9/11, I spent probably 10 days crammed into a Suburban, fully dressed out with SWAT gear in front of the governor's mansion, and we were just all sitting there wondering what in the world was going on, and all the increased protection on Governor Bush, since, like you said, President Bush was in office, and then your office was on the plaza level of the Capitol. So, I mean, like you said, you got to see Governor Bush all the time. I only got to see him probably a handful of times, and he would show up at the strangest events. I remember because back then, you worked off duty because the pay was, nowhere near where it was now. And I was at a private event, and this green Navigator pulls up, and the license plate just said 1.
Yeah.
And one guy gets out, and Jeb Bush gets out, and the first person he talked to, Matt, was me.
Wow.
He walked over and thanked me for my service, and I was a little bit starry-eyed because I'm a lifelong Republican, not that it matters, but it was really cool to meet him. And I saw him several more times, and he was always so personal. And, I mean, what an honor for you to be sitting right there in the nest to watch things work.
And there was days when I got to run into him early in the morning. One of the stories I always like telling and remembering is, I got to go to Florida State all the way from Chicago, but my parents were fantastic because they said, look, if you're going to go far away, it's up to you, but you're not getting a car or any of those types of extra features. So a lot of times I lived right off a campus, so you could walk there. But when you had to go to the Capitol, especially early in the morning, I didn't have a car. Some of my roommates did, but they were busy. So I would have to take the bus in. And so it would drop you off. It's not longer there anymore, but the bus station right across the street would be the Greyhound bus station. And one of the mornings I got dropped off at 7:30, 7:45, and I was walking up the hill from the bus station to the Capitol, and all of these, just like you did, Suburban zipped up and parked, and out jumped the governor. And he waved to me, and I said, I'm heading your direction. And I got to kind of just walk with him to the Capitol because he just wanted to stretch his leg because down the street is the governor's mansion. So probably one of those days when he realized no one was on the street. It's still bright and early in the morning. And from that bus station up the hill to the Capitol, getting to kind of just stand there walking with the governor, again, as a 20-year-old kid, was a pretty neat thing. And he was so gracious with his time, not just with me, but with so many other people. I know time and again when you talk to alums from that administration, they talk about, Governor Bush in the fondest of terms, more importantly because he always was challenging people with his, what do we call them, the BHAGs, the big, hairy, audacious goals. He was constantly pushing people to come up with new ideas. And, he was always engaged in all of the issues. So I know that meant a lot for the people who were working for him.
It had to be surreal for you too, though. You know what I mean? Yeah. And what an honor. And then going back to your work with the drug policy, so the drug triangle that was identified, with the pill mills, again, as an end user of the law, and that was something that we quickly recognized as well. That it was, North Carolina down to Florida, South Florida, and back. And it's just unique, Mike. I didn't know you did that, Matt. And
I'll plug in for Attorney General Bondi. Now that she's our U.S. attorney, she's doing obviously fantastic things in D.C. But one of the things that I think people forget about is when she first got elected, she had no political background. She was a prosecutor in the Hillsborough County State Attorney's Office. But she gets there, and she knew right off the bat, talking with so many of the experts, that the state of Florida needed to have something we take for granted today, a prescription drug monitoring program. All safe and secure, but this idea of if you're going to get Schedule 2 or 3 narcotics that are very dangerous, there needs to be some tracking mechanism so that doctors enter it in, so that way you're not having some of the diversion that was happening.
Yeah.
Well, she got unbelievable pushback at the time from the legislature and others, and that was on a lifeline. And it could have easily fallen apart because we're going to do all this other stuff. We're going to give law enforcement more resources. You don't need a prescription drug monitoring program. But because of her, she was adamant and fought so hard for it. I believe she single-handedly saved that system, got it fully implemented, got it funded, and from almost the point of when it was fully operational in 2011, then you go to 2012, you go to 2013, because of that and a host of other things. But I think the main focus was having that monitoring program that she fought for. You started seeing a really big decline in the number of prescription drug deaths, especially from oxycodone, because you were able to have much more accountability. And I just watching her that first year, she easily could have caved and done the things of like some compromise, but she is a strong woman of principle, and she stood up time and again and said, nope, not only do we need it, I've talked to my law enforcement partners, I've heard from a lot of the sheriffs that we need to have it, and so we're doing it. And because of her, we had it, and we still have it today, and it's certainly thriving in that situation.
Yeah, and again, I didn't know some of those details. Mm-hmm. No, Matt, would you say that the marijuana card program that's akin to that same system, right?
Yeah, where it's going to be tracked and tracked and monitored.
So her idea is still in a different variant alive today, right?
And the thing with the prescription drug monitoring program and other things like that is at the time, reason why Florida became that epicenter for prescription drug diversion is because we didn't have a prescription drug monitoring program. One of the things that she held up time and again was this image, and it was all of the states highlighted. I think it was like Rhode Island, Florida, and maybe Alaska didn't have one, but all the other states had one. So when you're not monitoring and tracking these very dangerous drugs, it's no wonder that all of these pill mills, as we were calling at the time, these doctor shops opened up where they were just writing unlimited numbers of prescription because it wasn't being tracked, it wasn't being monitored. But once Florida decided to join the other 47, 48 other states, it had a huge drop in that type of dangerous diversion.
Yeah, and had a huge impact. It still does. Mm-hmm. Going back to you with FSA as a deputy executive director. So when you were over operations, what does that mean? For our listeners, what does that mean?
Well, this association, if you're kind of not familiar with it, it's a fantastic group where you get to say to people, not only do I get to work with, oh, you work for the sheriff. I always remind people, no, I get to work for all of the sheriffs, all 67 of them. And with the Florida Sheriff Association, founded in 1893, we're the largest, I believe, most successful sheriff association in the country. We have 32 full-time employees, annual budget north now of $14 million. And we do a lot of great work, not just in the community, but for those sheriffs who need support, whether you're a large sheriff's office, a medium, or a small. And it just differs. For the larger sheriff's offices, I always tell people the biggest benefit I know they see from us is the coordination we do legislatively. And that's one of the things that I think I spent most of my time with starting in 2014 was all of the legislative work. Not only track all the bills, but have a legislative summit every year where every sheriff gets to come and put their ideas forward, whether you're a small sheriff's office where you only got maybe 8 or 9, 10 deputies, or if you're a sheriff's office with $1 billion budget. We listen to your legislative ideas and kind of figure out what should our priorities be, but not just advocate for good bills. I think the biggest thing we do too with the team we have and had back then and continue to have now is push back against bills that would have adverse effect on law enforcement, bills that would damage the profession, leave deputies exposed, things like that. So I think, the operations side at the Sheriff Association, the biggest one that probably would take up most of my time because it's the thing that kind of unites all of the sheriffs is the legislative program. And then we did a lot of trainings. So I had staff that work with me. So we do a Commander's Academy twice a year now. That is a 2-week leadership academy. We do jail services. 57 of the 67 sheriffs are the jail operator. So we do all of those types of services to help support them from inspections, but also training to make sure all of the jails are up to all of the new Florida model jail standards.
Right.
And then obviously the communication work that would take up a good amount of time. And that communication work is figuring out ways in which all of the great work sheriffs are doing, how do we highlight that? Through our magazines, through obviously, we've made huge progress in 2014, 15, 16 with social media, putting together fun and engaging videos. Again, leveraging some of the work that sheriff's officers are doing, but kind of creating our own content to push out there so people see the great work that the men and women are doing every day around the state.
Yeah, absolutely. On the policy, can we talk about Amendment 10 for a minute?
Mm-hmm.
So for our listeners, Amendment 10, let me back up. Mm-hmm. So, and Matt, jump in.
Yeah.
The Office of the Sheriff is a constitutional office in the state of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of the first offices created, and it has great authority and great responsibility. But there were several sheriff's offices in Florida at the time that were part of the charter sheriffs or charter counties movement. Can you explain more about that and then what Amendment 10 did?
Oh, yeah. And this is probably one of the, if you say, well, what are the most exciting things or most rewarding work you've done at the Sheriff Association, it's getting to work with sheriffs on Amendment 10.
Yeah.
And Amendment 10 was on the ballot in 2018. It was a constitutional amendment that made sure that all 5 constitutional offices in Florida, they're the sheriff's office, the tax collector, the clerk of court, the property appraiser, and the supervisor of elections, that all of them are elected and independent. And so really what happened with the charter form of government starting in the 1960s was it was good. It was a good idea to allow a lot of these counties some of the autonomy to kind of adjust their forms of government to best suit the needs of the people. I think over time what happened is you had some interests where they were trying to collect too much power. And so what they did in some places, which I know you're familiar with, in Volusia, you got rid of the elected and independent sheriff, but you still had an elected sheriff of Volusia, but a lot of the authorities and control over staff was delegated to the county commission, the county manager. So what Amendment 10 did is fixed Volusia to make it not just an elected office, but an independent office of the sheriff. But the biggest one was Miami-Dade. And because of issues with the previous sheriff back in the 50s and 60s, they had abolished the office, turned it into an appointed, essentially, police chief that reported to the mayor. And you had fantastic men and women who worked at that office, but it wasn't truly a sheriff's office. And the sheriffs at that point, and I think they've done it numerous times in the 1990s, they tried to work on it and other opportunities to figure out how they could amend the Constitution. And what we were able to do, and some of it, again, is just perfect timing. We had two presidents of the Florida Sheriff's Association, Walton County Sheriff Mike Atkinson and then Columbia County Sheriff Mark Hunter, kind of working side by side over about an 18-month period where this, as I like to call this weird quirk in our Constitution, the Constitution Revision Commission came on board. And they meet only once every 20 years. Governor makes some appointments, Speaker makes some appointments, the Senate President, as well as the Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court. And this Constitution Revision Commission can put a whole host of ideas on the ballot, or they could put nothing on the ballot. But they've got to meet once every 20 years and kind of look at the Constitution, get input from the citizens, and then meet almost like a mini legislative body, and they can then put stuff directly onto the ballot.
Right.
And the sheriffs said, aha, this is our time. And so one of the things that I got to lead on, and it was just so rewarding, is working with those sheriffs and figuring out strategies of getting good folks that were on the Constitution Revision Commission, finding our advocates and working through it. And the person who did it was a constitutional officer, Carolyn Timon from Martin County. I don't think she ever thought she would be doing this, but when she got appointed to the Constitution Revision Commission and sheriffs like Will Snyder down in Martin and others talked to her, she then got the idea of putting this on the ballot for all 5 constitutional offices. And we were able to not just get it on the ballot, but then in 2018, when Sheriff Hunter was president, work on a really robust educational campaign. Sheriffs, everyone was out and about telling people the importance of voting for it. And then it passed with 63% of the support. Needed to have 60 to pass. We had 63. And then over time, it took about another 4 or 5 years of implementation. And then thankfully by 2024, we have an elected sheriff of Miami-Dade County, Sheriff Rosie Cordero Stutz, and it's just been fantastic.
And Sheriff Rosie was one of our, I think, our third or fourth guest. Sheriff Atkinson, I think, was our third.
Yeah.
Sheriff Rosie was our fourth.
Yeah.
So it's amazing. I want to ask you questions about that, but before we do that, why is it important for the office of the sheriff to remain independent? Why is that such a big deal?
Well, I think not only is it to be independent, but obviously the two things working hand in hand. I think being elected. And one of the things that I've always heard from the sheriffs is the great thing about having an elected sheriff, which I had in my hometown growing up in the west suburbs of DuPage County. There's a sheriff of DuPage, but really it's the police departments that have more of the sway, especially up north. The sheriff kind of just runs the jail. But I thought it was great when someone like Sheriff Atkinson used to always tell me, and when he was going around telling people, the importance of the elected and independent sheriff is because you, the citizens, or at least the majority of the citizens, because you got to win with a majority of the vote, you get to decide the tone and tenor of which the services you need to keep you safe and how they're delivered. So for Walton County, they like Sheriff Atkinson. They like the way in which he runs his sheriff's office. He's given the citizens of that county a vision of how he wants to deliver services. And then they can elect him or not elect him every 4 years. The independence comes in if a sheriff says, listening to the people out in the community, we need to do a juvenile diversion program. I think there are too many of these kids causing crimes, but not only do we need to make sure they're arrested, we need to get them into a program that can help rehabilitate them. A sheriff can just, on the dime, pivot and say, you know what, I'm going to figure out a way of doing this and I'm going to implement it tomorrow with my team. He doesn't have to, obviously he has to stay within the confines of the law, but he doesn't have to go to the county commission, figure out ways in which to get approval, have it on an agenda. If the sheriff decides to do something, he can kind of, through the power of his or her personality, bring folks together, treatment providers, maybe a recovery support program, and says, look, you all are getting funding in different areas, but if we could all come together, I've got this idea, let's get it going. You could get it started today. And that's what I think is so important about that independent sheriff. They can be the leader of the community to take all of the input. And when people want something done, the sheriff can get that done for them. And that's where the independence comes in, because so many times we also like councils. We love commissions. We love our, county commissioners, the group, to have that kind of thoughtful discussion. But sometimes you do have to get to that one person who can then lead and get something implemented. And that's what's happened, I think, in the great state of Florida over so many decades has been that elected and independent sheriff being that beacon for good to make lives better and to keep communities safe.
And we'll be right back. SaferWatch and law enforcement. SaferWatch is a powerful tool that enhances public safety by improving communication between law enforcement and the community it serves. Through the SaferWatch platform, agencies can send real-time emergency and non-emergency alerts, keeping residents and visitors informed about critical incidents, safety advisories, and community updates. Additionally, SaferWatch allows the public to report crime tips, suspicious activities, and threats, providing law enforcement with valuable intelligence. SaferWatch tips have led to the prevention of school shootings, stopped sexual predators, caught wanted fugitives and burglary suspects, and has even prevented suicides. This easy-to-use two-way communication tool ensures faster response times and helps protect the community proactively. By empowering both citizens and law enforcement, SaferWatch fosters a safer, more connected community. For more information, visit saferwatchapp.com or download the free SaferWatch app on iOS or Android. Now back to the show. 100%. And just like you just said, the buck stops with the sheriff. He or she, like you said, can pivot on a dime and adjust to their community and their needs and things like that. It's super important. Having worked for sheriffs and police chiefs, I see the differences. And you're right. There's city commissions, there's agendas, there's budgets involved, or we're going to do this. Like you said, hey, tomorrow, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. So when I worked in Volusia County with Sheriff Chitwood, he got elected as a charter sheriff. So he was the elected sheriff. Technically, he was the elected public safety director.
Yes.
And every employee that he had, including me and 1,000 other people, were Volusia County employees. So he had, by the charter, he could not discipline anybody. He could not change programs. He couldn't change the fleet, like the fleet of vehicles, go to a different weapon. Not just him, but the sheriffs that were before him. It all had to go through the county manager. So it was almost like an elected sheriff that worked for a very large county police department or a county government. And that didn't work really well, especially with Sheriff Chitwood's tenacity about keeping our community safe. So there was a huge crash that happened very, very quickly. And I think it highlighted, the differences between a charter sheriff and a constitutional sheriff. And again, if I'm the sheriff and I need to make immediate impact on our community or on the organization, I shouldn't have to go through the county manager. So at the same time, like you said, Sheriff Atkinson, Sheriff Atkinson and I worked the streets here in Tallahassee together, and we were both young and foolish and have lots of good stories. But Sheriff Atkinson and Sheriff Chitwood met, and they really, like you said, it was almost the perfect storm. And then to bring in, Miami-Dade and things like that. So for us overnight, once you did the heavy lift, and for us, when we went first to go from charter to constitutional, and everything was going to change overnight. So we spent almost, I think, a year and a half. We worked with retired Sheriff Bill Cameron. We worked a lot with Sheriff Atkinson. We worked a lot with your team. We worked a lot with David Brand. And we had to come up with how do we do this? Because the county that we worked for at the time basically turned around and gave us the cold shoulder and said, you want to be on your own? You're on your own.
Yeah.
So we had to kind of reinvent the wheel, and we relied on the brotherhood and the sisterhood of other sheriffs who sent plenty of people to come in and go, this is how we run HR. Here's how we run the CFO's office, these things. So again, that shows the value of the Sheriff's Association, in my opinion, because I don't know that you would get that many police chiefs together, because the police chiefs usually work for a deputy city manager, and then the council or So it was amazing. When Sheriff Rosie got elected, she came on the show and we talked about all the challenges she's faced just in the last 6 or 8 months and the challenges that lie ahead.
Yeah.
And it's massive. And she's a fantastic person. Her undersheriff is a fantastic person. And since they've rolled out and they've become the office of the sheriff, we've used so many of their employees, like Major George Pereira is just a national known expert on AI and cybercrime. And Sheriff Rosie's like, if he's available, he's yours.
Yeah.
And he has led education on those things all through North and West Florida because of the office of the sheriff. So
time we tell people, you got to trust the voters. And I think there was some apprehension of saying, okay, this is it. Miami-Dade, more than 50 years, hasn't voted for their sheriff. And there was a lot of people who ran in that first time, but they looked at someone like her who had been working in that agency, who had the law enforcement experience. And then, obviously she was victorious at the end. And it's just been a great, fantastic relationship because she's relied on fellow sheriffs in the association to provide her with some guidance. But ultimately, it's her office to run, and she runs it great. I know a lot of sheriffs aren't, envious of her because most sheriffs have to sit with their 5-member county commission to get their budget, and they got to keep, 3 of the 5 happy.
Yeah.
Down in Miami-Dade, and I was down there during some of the discussions and debates when we were working to not just after the amendment got passed, but kind of dealing with the county commission when they were trying to kind of narrow the scope of that office, and there was lawsuits and other stuff that we had to push back on, is 15-member county commission. That's just got to be so unwieldy. It's like dealing with your own little mini legislature there. But yeah, it's just, that's one of those things you look back in your life where a lot of hard work went into it at our Sheriff Association, but it was such a team effort and all of these unique personalities coming together. Carolyn Timon, clerk of court from Martin County. There was key legislators at the time, Governor Rick Scott. Without him appointing the right people to that Constitution Revision Commission, it easily could have been shut down. The experts were all telling us right before the day before the election, I don't think any of these constitutional amendments are going to pass. Then the first one failed, but all the other ones did. They all passed. So it truly was something that, looking back, something that I know so many of the sheriffs are proud of because it is going to be lasting, because unless they want to go back and try to undo this through a constitutional amendment, you will get to vote for your sheriff. You will get to vote for your property appraiser. You don't like your property appraiser and you feel that they're not doing, you can elect someone new. And I think this is what is so fantastic, I believe, in Florida, is that you put the authority in the voters and they get to decide how they want these offices to be run.
That's right.
Yeah.
And for you and me both, that was a highlight of my career. And especially, from your end, I could see all the labor you put into it. From my end, it was trying to keep up with, oh my God, this is happening. How do we do this?
Yeah.
But,
if anyone wants to know more, we did a 5-part, because I realized one of these days, people are going to want to know, how the heck did this happen? And so in our FSA cast, we did a 5-part oral history of Amendment 10, everything from working with the legislature to the Constitution Revision Commission so if anyone's interested in it, you can check it out on FSA cast, because we wanted to preserve that. So years later, people could go back when some of the memories aren't as crisp as they are now.
Right.
You'll get to hear, and we used audio from Sheriff Chitwood. And then we concluded it with a sit-down interview with Sheriff Rosie Cordero Stutz, and it was fantastic.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So Matt, let's fast forward to your new role. You're the executive director of the, I think, like you said, the biggest and at least most successful, efficient, effective Sheriff's Association in the U.S.
Yeah.
What kind of a daunting task is that?
Well, every day you wake up with new challenges, and I think what makes it so rewarding is that we have a thriving Sheriff Association. We're doing very well financially because we have great support from the more than 80,000 honorary members of the Florida Sheriff Association. The sheriffs had the wisdom many decades ago to create an honorary membership program where they went out to pillars of the communities to see if they wanted to contribute and be a part of this association. And so, I think different forms of associations and levels of success, you could probably have some legislative successes here or there if it was just an executive director, an assistant, and a few other staff members. But our reach is so far, and I've been spending some time talking about the legislative program, but what we do is so much other work for the sheriffs, from training. A new initiative we started is accreditation. I think the most important thing that so many of these sheriffs have said over the years is, I would love to figure out a way to get state accredited. And if you're not familiar with it, it's, just like you would when you go to a hospital. You go to a hospital, I hope this hospital where I'm about to get medical care is some form of accreditation to reach that they've reached some level of standard so that the care I get is excellent. Now, the issue with Florida is we've been so far advanced from other states when it comes from minimal standards and the way in which we professionalize it. I mean, when you had some of these instances happening in other states many years ago, you look at Florida, they were at the cutting edge in the 1960s of getting strong professional standards. But now we're at a point now, especially when Congress is looking at the idea of making it mandatory that all of the law enforcement agencies become some form of accredited. And so the Florida sheriffs had the wisdom of saying, look, that bill's probably going to fail, but we should get ahead of this. We should take some of our resources and hire staff at the Florida Sheriff's Association to figure out a way to not force, but if you are a sheriff that if you always wanted to get accredited, but you didn't know where to get started, or you needed someone to help guide you, we now have the staff that can't do it for you. You got to kind of do it yourself, but we have the support and the expertise and know-how to assist you with writing policy. So you now have a pursuit policy, how to deal with, evidence and all this other stuff that was always being done by sheriff's offices, but now we have a dedicated team. So when I wake up every day, I've got to think about not just, which I didn't have to do before as the deputy executive director, but certainly have to do now, is make sure we're generating enough of the revenue we have to do all the great things that the sheriffs have become accustomed to.
Right.
And it's training, it's legislative affairs, it's now helping with accreditation support. We are able to raise money every year to purchase bulletproof vests for deputies. We help with a strong partnership with the Deputy Sheriff Association. So I'm glad to be here today and talk about, because of our success, we're able to then help out and support the Deputy Sheriff Association, your lend a hand fund, and ways in which where tragedy strikes in a sheriff's office and someone needs some funding because, oh my God, their house burned down or they have some medical issue. With working with you all, we're able to then help provide some of that financial support. And obviously, as I mentioned before, all the great communication work. So every day I come to work with some new challenge, and some days it can be daunting, but I think what gives me peace of mind is that we have an unbelievable team. As I mentioned before, we're now more than 30 full-time employees. That's why when you look at some of these other sheriff associations around the state, they're wonderful people and they do great work. But sometimes it's an executive director, an assistant, and someone that runs membership, and that's it. And thankfully here in Florida, we've got a whole wide variety of resources that we can provide to those sheriffs. And that's why I think too, we have we have full support. We just got done with our summer conference, and other than maybe a sheriff or two had an illness and other person had another issue come up, they couldn't make it. At our business meeting Monday morning, when our U.S. attorney or our U.S. Senator Ashley Moody was there, we had 60 of 67 sheriffs. And that happens pretty much every one of our events during my time there. Is this association would be not as successful if it was just a bunch of staff and a handful of sheriffs. It's everyone from Lafayette, Liberty County, to Hernando, to Monroe County down in the Keys, and then our gigantic sheriff's offices like, Pinellas, Broward, Palm Beach, Orange. They're all active members, and they're all working together, sharing ideas, and realizing, I think the key thing that we've been able to do at this association is listen and understand. I think some of our really large sheriff's offices, Sheriff Grady Judd and others, they listen to the Lafayette County Sheriff Brian Lamb, and they want to hear what are his challenges and what can they do to help support him to make sure the people of Lafayette are getting great services. Same thing with Liberty and so many of these counties. And that's where it makes my job so rewarding, is realizing that these aren't 67 sheriffs, not just taking care of their community. They're willing to take time out of their busy schedule every day to kind of come together and see who else is in need and who else needs help and support. And that's what I think gets me excited to come to work every day.
Yeah, and that's amazing. So going back to what we talked about earlier about, the connection, the brotherhood, sisterhood. So as an example, like you brought up Liberty County or Jackson County. So they are financially constrained as defined by...
Yeah, fiscally constrained, they call it.
Thank you, fiscally.
There's 29 of those right now.
Okay. Yeah. And those are mainly the rural sheriffs up in North Florida, West Florida, but there's some around the central southern part of the state, around Lake Okeechobee. But the larger mega sheriff's offices, like you mentioned, like Broward, Pinellas, and Miami-Dade, they help out too with fleets needs, right? I mean, a sheriff in, let's say, Jackson County can reach out to other sheriffs. Talk about that program. I think Jan runs it, or...
Yeah. We've got multiple ways of doing it, not just... We call it the Wanted Property Program, where some people can offer up stuff, but there's also ways in which we're just spur of the moment stuff happens. And we've been doing a lot of work on immigration enforcement, obviously with the new Trump administration, and then obviously with Governor DeSantis as well leading the way on it. There is additional work having to be done. And most recently, a sheriff in a very rural county had reached out and said, look, I'm willing to help out with some of this transport stuff that we're doing from county to county, but I have really no transport van. And another sheriff from a very large county stepped forward and said, look, I got a van. It's got 90,000 miles on it. I probably was going to get a little bit more out of it, but I'm going to get it to your team so you guys have something, so you guys are safe and secure, and then I'll just work to, get a new one. So that's type of stuff. Not only does, the Sheriff Association have kind of this wanted property list where we can kind of hopefully exchange the stuff that people need. Yeah. Sometimes it just organically happens where an issue of the day comes up and sheriffs are willing to donate patrol cars, or in this case, donate a transport van. And that type of help just, you can't even measure it because it just helps them in so much that another sheriff was willing to give up something that they kind of could have kept for maybe another year or two.
Yeah. And it's this huge connection where they all work together. Like you said, the variances between, let's say, Union County and, again, going back to Miami-Dade, yes, they're sheriffs, but their communities are so vastly different, the needs, but they come together, especially through FSA, to meet those needs in the legislative items that come up that impact everybody in the state, regardless of rural or not. Talk about, if you would, Matt, let's say that we had a natural disaster. We have a hurricane. What role does FSA play in that? I mean, you guys have a seat at the table at the Emergency Operations Center. How does that work?
Well, that's another thing that I kind of handled with operations, but I'd say I handled really was the team at FSA. We had two fantastic employees, really multiple employees over the years who have come and gone, but David Brand and Steve Cole, and back before then it was also Steve Harriet, who have a long background in law enforcement, and they were working with me in operations. And so, we have a seat at the desk at the ESF called ESF 16. If you've ever been to the State Emergency Operations Center, everyone's kind of divided in their kind of area of expertise. ESF 16 is all law enforcement. You got 11, you got 10, you got medical, food, some other areas dealing with transportation. And by everyone kind of being in their pods, you're able to kind of stay within that, but also come together at least once or twice a day to kind of share information to make sure things are going well. But as you know, here in Florida, we get hit with some hurricanes from time to time. And by the key role that the Sheriff Association plays is that all of the sheriffs, every 4 years when they get reelected, they come together and they sign a mutual aid agreement that lets them share resources so that if a sheriff is impacted by a hurricane, like Sheriff Wayne Padgett was in Taylor County, we already have an agreement in place where if the state calls on support and they said, hey, we need 50 deputies to help out Sheriff Padgett because the hurricane came through and has wiped them out, and they need help because, they don't want to make sure there's looting, and they want to give the deputies or the correctional staff time off to deal with their families. Through the ESF 16, through our mutual aid, that's asked, and it can be done very, very quickly. Police chiefs do great work too, and I know through your experience, they all are the same way, trying to help out fellow police departments.
Yeah.
But again, there's a little bit of a layer of bureaucracy. You got to get the county manager or the city manager and others to weigh in. But I think what we're able to do with our emergency response capabilities is respond very timely because some of those agreements are already signed and they're in place. And so what the FSA staff does is not just staff the desk 24/7 during those emergency ops. They're able to work with the sheriffs, and we have our own system set up so make sure this all kind of coordinates in a timely fashion. We have a task force chair, which is Bay County Sheriff Tommy Ford, and then we divide the state up into zones. So we have 7 different zones, put a sheriff in charge of it, and it's that sheriff's responsibility within that zone to do things ahead of the storm. All right, who has boats that could be donated and be ready to go? Who's self-contained? Self-contained meaning you could go to an impacted area and you don't need housing, food, air conditioning. You've got essentially your own mobile command bus or tent to stay in. So every kind of zone keeps track of that. And then when the storm hits and we're now in recovery mode, our task force chair working with the FSA staff can quickly go through all of this and assign stuff out and then make sure that, next thing you know, Taylor County's taken care of, Suwannee, Jefferson, any county that is in that path of the storm, we can quickly assign sheriff's offices to go there and help them out. And it's just another rewarding work that we get to do at the Sheriff Association. But time and again, what we hear is, thank God the Florida Sheriff Association's around to help us with that, because if not, it could get a little bit discombobulated of who's going where and confusion. And so again, we're just kind of that force multiplier to bring everyone together and to talk.
Exactly. It's immediate resources to immediate problems in a coordinated effort. So that's amazing. And let's talk about this too, Matt. So next week there's
well, you're talking about the Sheriff Association?
Yes.
Yeah, we got our board meeting. So every year we got to get our budget approved. And then the next day we do our legislative summit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So what happens at the legislative summit?
This is a great idea that I think the sheriffs came up with well before my time is, what we don't want, and I'll probably back up here a minute. Florida Sheriff Association gets started in 1893. So we've now been around for well over 130 years. And it's hard to believe that the Sheriff Association existed before we still had counties. Pinellas didn't get established until 1912. And so we only probably had about, maybe in the 30s or 40s counties when we were first established in 1893. And, the first sheriff and all of that started in, 1821. But what we had, and the reason why the Sheriff Association came together in 1893 is a group of sheriffs realized 2 things. We need to create an association because there's this thing in Tallahassee called the legislature that's meeting, and they're starting to pass bills and laws in the late 1890s and in the early 1900s. And if we don't get together and kind of work together and figure out what we should get passed and what we should try to get, killed, this is not going to be good for us. And so I think the Sheriff Association existed, and we have the records to go back and look at it, really for two reasons. It was to have a legislative program, and the second thing is to have meetings and conferences. So I joke with the staff, it's like the legislative program and our conferences, those are the two things that are still true today. We just did our successful summer conference, bringing all the sheriffs together, because now we have that association, but now obviously doing the legislative work. And I think there was a period of time, like all organizations, things go well, and there's other times where things don't go so well. And I think we had gotten to a point before our previous executive director, Steve Casey, who did a fantastic job of giving it some structure, but we were, I think, a little bit lost legislatively. And I think part of that was because you didn't have a structure at the association to give every sheriff a seat at the table. And so you would have some sheriffs who knew the legislative process would go there and run their own bills, or say that they were okay with an amendment to a bill that might damage other sheriffs. And so what we've been able to do is to create structure. And I think since my time in 2014 to today, we have an unbelievable way in which everyone's voice is heard. There are no bad ideas. So if you are sitting in your office today and your chief deputy comes up to you, or lieutenant or sergeant, or even your records clerk says, look, sheriff, boss, we got a problem with this. Let me show you in state statute why it says this, but why we need to get a change. And that sheriff can type it up or just send it to me or our director of government affairs, and we'll put it together. We create a nice book together, and we sometimes have 15 or 20 proposals. And we go around the room, and every sheriff gets an opportunity to brief their ideas. And then the key thing that happens at our legislative summit is the chair of our legislative committee, and it's been this way for a little more than a decade now, the Pinellas County Sheriff, Bob Galtieri, he then says, with the consent of the president, let's vote on the top three. And then sheriffs, just like they do every 4 years to vote for our office, they get to vote for what their proactive legislative priorities are. And there's sometimes years where it's really tough. There's some really good ideas that might not make it to the top. But what's so good about it is those sheriffs then say, well, can I work on it by myself? And we always say, well, since we have a legislative committee, the president every year appoints a chair, and it's been Sheriff Galtieri, like I said, for about the last decade. You have this committee structure where other sheriffs are on it. We have rural sheriffs, we have mid-sized sheriffs, and we have large sheriffs on this legislative committee. And so all throughout session, they meet. And we go over bills. We say, all right, here's a bill. And we put it in front of the committee, and they look at it, and they say, it's an okay bill. We have no issue with it. Let it go. Other times we look at bills and we say, no. What is this legislator thinking? And we have an approach and a process now where we can engage that legislator and not, tell them it's the worst idea ever, but figure out a way of either getting it changed or having it, as one sheriff so eloquently puts, we need to get that bill driven into a ditch. And so we try to drive the bad bills into a ditch, support the bills we like. But I think the key thing, again, with this association time and again, is it's giving sheriffs a voice, but also giving them structure to go around and feel a part of it, and so that they don't have this situation. Because I learned this many years ago from the previous executive director. We don't want issues where the worst thing we could have happen is all the major county sheriffs say, let's create our own association. And all the rural sheriffs say, let's create the rules. It's the Florida sheriffs, and we shouldn't divide ourselves. And I think because of the structure we've done with our legislative work, it works fantastically because everyone feels a part of it, and everyone is a part of it because they get to come to the summit. We do weekly legislative calls. We have a committee that is diverse, that is not tilted one direction or another. It truly is balanced upon the whole state of different size sheriff's offices. And so we get unbelievable support. And what makes it great is when you do have a problem legislatively and you need to get sheriffs engaged, they're ready to go. And they're a phone call away. Hey, sheriff, your representative is a key vote on this bill. We need him to vote yes. Can you? Absolutely. And then getting that sheriff engaged, you're not, bringing them off the bench cold. They've been active, involved in all of the work we've done. And so that too has been just an unbelievable force multiplier of getting more and more sheriffs engaged and making sure that, we are truly the Florida Sheriff Association covering all 67 counties.
One voice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
As we're getting ready to wind down, Matt, name maybe 3 or 5 things that you're super excited about from the FSA's perspective in the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the most exciting thing I would say I am still excited about it is the idea that we have 67 sheriffs. I think that's one of those things too, where looking at all the hard work that went in for Volusia and Miami-Dade, I think that is going to be something that we just want to continue on and keep that momentum going. I think with our legislative program, there's always new challenges coming up. And so we're always excited about that. But I think the biggest thing that I would like to focus on, and I think maybe your listeners would be interested in it, is another idea that came up a few years ago, is if you're not familiar with the Florida Sheriff Association's campus, we're right here on Mahan Drive, about 5 minutes away from the Capitol. And the sheriffs were very wise in the 1980s. They realized they were moving around, and they said, look, we've been here now more than 100 years. We're not going anywhere. Why are we renting office space? We should buy something. And the Florida sheriffs in the early 80s bought land on Mahan, about a 3-acre piece of land, and they had their original building. Well, that building tragically in 2008 burned down. And then the sheriffs came together and built the Sheriff Association we have today, which is a gorgeous building, has a very large training center that can hold up to 100 people, obviously our 30-plus staff members, and has our law enforcement memorial. But over the hard work that we did many years ago, we had an opportunity to purchase the land next to us, which is another 3-acre parcel. But the sheriffs always wanted it. I've heard these stories time and again of like, if we could just get that parcel, we'd have a 6-acre campus. What are we going to do with it? And I think the idea that was put forth is we should foster the next generation. And that next generation is people who want to work in a sheriff's office to be a deputy, a correctional officer, work in dispatch, be a civilian employee. So what we are so excited to announce, and we did the groundbreaking early July, is we're building the Florida Sheriff's Youth Learning Center. And this is going to be a 22,000 square foot center. It's going to be the size we're building now. It's going to completely wrap our campus where now you've got a full campus of both the Sheriff Association as well as this Youth Learning Center. And it's really been something that all of the sheriffs have, again, gravitated for. It has not been two sheriffs. It's been everyone pulling in the same direction, realizing that if you have a group of 5th graders in Holmes County, you can now, when this center is built, bring them to the Florida Sheriff Association. Well, they'll get to sit in a theater room, watch a 10 or 15-minute video about all of the great things, the history of the office of sheriff, things that you can do in your community, and then get to take this interactive tour where they get to see and touch and feel maybe a patrol car or deal with other issues like dispatching a call and having all of the interactions that you get to see of how a sheriff's office has a positive impact. And then obviously come visit our law enforcement memorial, and then we're going to have a place for them to kind of, take a break and eat their lunch and then come together and kind of talk with their teacher about things that they learned. And, I know it's a small step, maybe 800, 900, 1,000 kids a year can come through. But if you're in Holmes County, a 5th grader, or you're in Orange County and your class gets to come up and take that tour, maybe also visit the Capitol, and then you get back home and you're going to hopefully be inspired to say, you know what, I want to have a career in dispatch. Or I realize today all of the things that a sheriff's office does dealing with crime scenes, and I want to be that person in my career. Or you want to be a deputy, or you want to work in corrections. It's going to expose kids to this at a very early age. And if you get nothing else, it'll be an opportunity for those young people to realize that the sheriff deputies and the sheriffs are the good guys.
That's right.
Ready to help you. And I think, again, that separates Florida from so many other states is that, we respect law enforcement. They want to make sure to always thank the deputies for their work, but it's now a much better appreciation of the work they do every day. So what I'm really excited about is obviously breaking ground. The Sheriff Association purchased that land, and because of the great advocacy work of so many, we now have $15 million from the state appropriations process to begin building that. We'll be going back one more time for our 3rd installment, but we now have the funding to build it. And starting here, we broke ground in July, but I believe by this fall, we'll really start the construction process. And we're excited about opening it in the fall of 2027 and having some of our first students come through. And I think it's going to be just a fantastic opportunity from sheriffs all across the state to bring students and to be exposed to the positive work that is being done in all of our sheriff's offices.
Yeah. I mean, you're really going to touch tomorrow's leaders today at that center. And that's beyond words how cool that would be. I know as a child growing up, I would have loved to have had that opportunity.
And we look forward to partnering with the Deputy Sheriff Association, because this is going to be not just a Florida Sheriff Association project, having the Deputy Sheriff Associations part of it, as well as the Florida Sheriff Youth Ranches. It's going to be just a whole team effort. So I'm really looking forward to working with the Deputy Sheriff Association too, because it is going to be something for everyone to be a part of.
Yeah, Matt. Hey, thank you. And I wanted to tell you too, from a lot of our listeners don't know the difference between the Florida Sheriff's Association and Florida Deputy Sheriff's Association. So today, by you coming in, you've certainly highlighted and really gone down deep about some of those details. And in earlier podcasts, I explained what we do, that, we're the voice of Florida's deputies, and we try to be there in their darkest hour and bring them relevant training, things like that. But a lot of what we do would not be possible without you and the generosity of your staff and the cooperation. So publicly, thank you for all that, because we are one. And I'm really grateful for that, because anytime I need something or our executive director needs something, you guys roll out the red carpet, and we work hand in glove, and I thank you for that.
No, absolutely. It's a great partnership.
Yeah. So if somebody wanted to know more about the Florida Sheriff's Association, where would they go look for that?
Well, I think you can go to flsheriffs.org. So that's flsheriffs.org. We have a fantastic website that'll not only give you an idea of what we do at the association, has a fantastic directory, so you can go through and see all of the different sheriffs around the state. If you want to get a hold of your sheriff, that's there. But also when you're there as well, is where we've got our podcast, FSA Cast. As I said, this is interesting for me to get to sit on this end of the table, because normally I'm the one doing the interviews, but I really appreciate you kind of giving me an opportunity to talk a little bit about myself. Don't usually do that too often, but to really highlight the great work of the Florida Sheriff's Association. So again, people can go to flsheriffs.org to learn more.
Okay. Matt Dunagan, Executive Director of the Florida Sheriff's Association. You have a Herculean task, and you make it look easy. Thanks for coming on board today.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to The Tactical Pause, the official podcast of the Florida Deputy Sheriff's Association. FDSA proudly serves over 25,000 deputy sheriffs across the state with legal benefits, vital training, and financial assistance in times of need. You can listen to previous episodes at fldeputysheriffs.org or wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a review and encourage your friends, coworkers, and those in the law enforcement community to listen as well. To learn more about the Florida Deputy Sheriff's Association and how we serve those who serve, visit our website at fldeputysheriffs.org.